Welcome to 360 Aviation. Today, let's do a deep dive into the Jeppesen charts. Now, what are Jeppesen charts? We as pilots use it to conduct an approach into airports, to taxi. Even for en route segments, we utilize these charts, which are basically representations of the procedures and arrivals into various airports. So right now in front of us, we have an approach chart, an arrival chart into Mumbai city, and especially the Mumbai runway 27. So let's dive right in and have a look. Now, if you look at this chart over here, typically when we look at a chart, it is divided into various subsections. The top header would be called the heading, and I can show you how it looks on the Jeppesen legend. If you go right over here, you'll see that there is a format of called a heading, communications, approach, briefing information, the MSA, the plan view, the profile view, conversion tables, icons, and landing minimums. So I'm going to do a deep dive into each of these segments so you understand it better. So let's first look at the heading subsection, right? That's the first part over here. So let's look at the Mumbai chart here. And if you look right over here, the heading typically comprises of the first segment over here is the identifier, the airport identifier or the name of the airport. And this is typically by the International Civil Aviation Organization called ICAO, and you can see it's VABB, right? Thereafter, you have the IATA code, that is the International Air Transport Association. They have a different name for the airport, and that's called BOM, or Bravo Oscar Mike. That is also coincidentally the name of the airport that you use to book the flight tickets, right? So if I'm booking a flight to Mumbai as a passenger, I'll probably see this BOM mentioned, right, if I want to choose the airport. All right, below that is the name of the airport. It's called Chhatrapati Shivaji International Airport, and that's your left part of the header. Now, if you look at the central part over here, typically you have the name of the company. It's called Jeppesen, which creates these charts. It's a private company. Below that, you have the issue date. So it is issued on the 7th of September 2018. It's an older chart that we are looking at right now, and effective from the 13th of September. All right. Now, typically what the company does would be they would issue the charts maybe a week or 2 weeks in advance so that the airlines have time to disseminate it to the various aircrafts. So even if you're in flight and let's say the chart expires, you have the new charts already with you because it has been disseminated a couple of weeks ahead of time, right? So the issue date and the effective date is often at a different date, okay? And then, of course, you have this over here, which is called your index number, this 11-3. What does that means basically is you could have multiple approaches into that airport. For example, you could have the runway 27 ILS, you could have the VOR approach, different types of approaches. So think of it like a content page, right? An index number. So you could have 11-3, 11-4, 11-5, and so on. All right, that's what this is called. Now, if you look at the right side, right segment over here, this is the name of the city, the geographical identifier for that airport. In this case, it's Mumbai, and the country, which is India. And you have the type of approach over here, which is the ILS approach, instrument landing system, right? Followed by ILS Zulu, runway 27. This should be pretty easy, runway 27. The ILS Zulu, what does Zulu stand for? It could be that you have multiple types of approaches for the same runway. For example, if you look at this chart over here, this is called the ILS Zulu for runway 27. And if you look at the procedure, typically this is designed for an overhead approach, right? So if I'm coming in like this, I cross the VOR, I fly outbound, and then I turn inbound, intercept the ILS, and then go ahead and land, right? So this is designed for an overhead approach. Okay. However, maybe I could go to a different chart, and you can see this is the ILS Yankee runway 27. You can see ILS Yankee mentioned over here, and you can see that this is designed for a DME arc approach, right? So a different kind of procedure. It's still the same ILS approach. However, the initial approach over here is different, right? You can see that it is designed for the ILS Yankee approach as a DME arc. So same approach, just different initial approach or missed approach or some variation of that same procedure. All right. Let's move back to the ILS Zulu approach, runway 27. So this subsection is called the heading section, all right, which we have just covered right now. Moving forward, the next segment is called your communication segment. So if you look over here, you can see that it's called the communication segment, right? This and right about here. Okay, so you have your D8 frequencies, your to get your weather information about the airport. You have your approach frequencies over here. So you have two frequencies here because of Mumbai being a busy airspace. They have bifurcated it into different airspace segments. You have your Mumbai tower. You have your ground frequencies. Again, because it being a busy and complex airfield, and with a lot of air traffic, they have assigned multiple frequencies for this airport, right? Depending on which part of the airport you are on, you contact that particular ground frequency. Thereafter, so this is your communication frequencies, and right below that is your navigation information. That typically is your localizer course, which is, you can see, India Sierra Charlie Zulu. That is the identifier for the localizer itself, what you tune into the aircraft, so that you're able to tune into the ILS, right? That's 110.3, and the final approach course. So this information typically is also shown in multiple areas. You can see that same information comes up right over here, right? The final approach course 270. What does that mean? That's the final course that you take just before you commence your descent and land into Mumbai Airport runway 27. You also have a DME height check. So because you're doing an ILS approach, it has a lateral segment and a vertical segment that you follow, correct? You will be flying this way and you will be flying a vertical segment. And obviously, because you are descending on the glide slope, you will need to do a height check. What if the glide slope is erroneous? What if it's not working correctly? So at 5 miles, they have identified or set an identifier for you that at 5 miles, please check your height. And if you're correctly established on the glide slope, you should be at 1610 feet. That is your altitude, 1610. And over here is 1587. That is your height above ground. You can see that Mumbai is not exactly at sea level. It's slightly above sea level, almost 23 feet above sea level, right? You can see that over here. So if you add that 23 feet, 1587 plus 23, you get your altitude of 1610, all right? So that's your altitude and height above ground, which you need to check when you're on the glide slope. Thereafter, we come to your minimums. That is the height or altitude at which you should mandatorily be able to see the runway. If you're not able to see the runway by this given altitude, you're expected to go around and discontinue the approach, basically go around, right? So that's called your ILS minimums. The DA, decision altitude, is 230 feet. You should be able to see the runway by 230, if not go around. And if you want to see height above ground, it's considered as 207 feet. You have the airport elevation. This is set from your airport reference point, and this is from your runway threshold. That's why it's slightly different, because the airport itself may have different points of elevation above sea level, right? So that's why there is a slight difference. This is from the runway threshold, 23 feet, and this is the elevation above sea level from the airport reference point, the central point of the airport. Thereafter, you have your MSA. This is called your MSA, right? So minimum safety altitude or minimum safe altitude basically guarantees terrain clearance, right? As long as you maintain this, you are safe. You will not run into terrain, okay? So you can see that over here that, let me just clear up the page here so it's easier for you to understand. So if you look at the MSA here, if you are approaching the airfield from the west, okay, from the west, my apologies, from the east, then if you maintain 3,800 feet, you will be clear of obstacles and terrain. If you're approaching the airfield from the west, then as long as you maintain 2,600 feet, you will be above the MSA, and it will keep you clear of obstacles and terrain. Now, since this is divided into two sectors, the east and the west sector, it is called also your sector altitude. Okay, as long as you stay above this, you're safe. So moving forward now, over here, if you look at the left side of the strip, you can see this is called the briefing strip. That is because this entire segment should form part of your approach briefing. If you look at the Jeppesen legend as well, you will notice that they call this as the approach briefing information, and that is why they have mentioned this as the briefing strip over here, so that you end up doing it in your briefing, and it's very critical information. Now, if you look at this segment over here, this is called your missed approach segment. In case you're not able to see the runway, or for any reason you feel the approach is unstabilized, you would initiate a go around, and that's called the missed approach. Now, this being a very, very critical aspect of your flight, they have given it in three specific places. Number one would be here, where they've given the in great detail, they have mentioned the entire approach procedure, right? So you can see that it says here, climb straight ahead to 700 feet, then climbing, turn left on heading 230 to 2600 feet, then turn left to join the VOR hold at 3800 feet, or as directed. They've also told you to not turn before the threshold. All right, so this is your text information about the missed approach. And to make it easier for you, over here, if you look, remember I told you that this is called your plan view, and over here they give you a graphical representation, so that's easier for you to plan the approach and easier for you to understand it, right? So over here you can see the same information is portrayed to you. It says climb straight ahead to 700 feet. So you can see these dotted lines. So let's say you have commenced the approach, and I'm just going to make it in red here. So you can see that you have commenced the approach and you're not able to see the runway, and then you decide to go around. You follow these black dotted line. So it says climb straight ahead to 700 feet, which you do initially. Then it says climbing, turn left on heading 230. So you turn left heading 230, and you can see that information is depicted over here. And it says climb to 2600 feet, climb to 2600 feet, then turn left to the VOR and join the VOR hold, right? And you can see over here, this will typically be a direct entry. You can see it's perfectly aligned with the inbound course over here. So you just go in like this and join the direct entry. Okay, so simple enough. This information is depicted over here in the plan view, so you're able to easily decipher the information during the planning stages. And number three, right over here, because when you initiate the missed approach or go around, typically your hands are going to be full. It's going to be very busy. Therefore, they have also shown you the initial actions that you need to take right over here in a very easy pictorial form, so that even if you forget, it guides you, right? So it says climb straight ahead 700 feet, turn left onto heading 230. So the initial actions are done, and then you can of course refer the chart and then see what else you will have to do. So this is the third place where they have mentioned it on the chart. All right, so the reason being that it's a very, very important procedure which needs to be briefed every single time you execute the approach. Apart from that, they've also told you that the altitude used or has to be set in hectopascals over here. The runway elevation also is given in terms of hectopascal along with the term mentioned over here, right? So typically 1 hectopascal is approximately 30 feet, and that's why it's showing it as 1 hectopascal, and you can see it's almost 30 feet over here. Transition level is set by the air traffic control. Obviously, coming in to land, you need to move, change over to your QNH, right? Because that gives you your altitude above sea level, and most of your terrain obstacles are also with respect to sea level. That's why you go to QNH. So they tell you that your transition level is set by ATC, and the latest by transition altitude 4,000 feet, you must have changed over to QNH if you're descending into the airport, right? Now, moving forward here, let's have a look at this section over here. You can see a number 1 mentioned over here saying 2,800 feet within 12 nautical miles. What that typically means is, you can see over here that your MSA is actually 3,800 feet if you are flying from the east towards the airport, right? However, if you get closer to the airport, that is, let's say you're within 12 miles, let's say you're 10 miles on the approach, let's say you're somewhere over here, for example, right? You're executing the approach and you are somewhere over here, and you can see you're approximately 9 miles from the runway on the localizer, right? So you're within 12 miles, and therefore your MSA should be 2,800 feet for you. As long as you stay about 2,800 feet, even if you stray off the localizer, etc., you will be safe. So that's what that information here indicates, right? Let's move on now. So we have now finished the first two segments, that is your heading of the chart. We have finished this, that is the heading. We have also finished the briefing information over here, right? And of course we have talked about the MSA in great detail over here, along with this strip over here, right? So that's what we are talking about, this and this. Now let's move on to the approach or the plan view. So in the plan view here, they've given you, in this particular airport, they have talked about that caution, do not mistake Mumbai Juhu for Mumbai Chhatrapati Shivaji International Airport. That's because there are two airports in Mumbai within the same airspace, and you can see that they have depicted it over here, right over here. And they've even given you the information here that both runways are very close together. So for Mumbai, Juhu airfield is your general aviation airfield. Also, a lot of helicopter traffic, etc., is typically found over there. Okay, with the same runway orientation of 27 and 09. So that's why they're asking you to be careful here. And apart from that, they've told you that DME is required. You can see that you need DME information, right? 9.1 miles, 5 miles, all these altitude checks that you need to do will be based on DME information on the localizer. So that's why they're talking about DME requirement. Moving forward, you can see that they have also given the altitude information above sea level with respect to major obstacles. So you can see, for example, a building over here, 675 feet, and this black arrow, there's always a black arrow, which typically identifies the highest obstacle above sea level, right? So in this case, it's this hill over here, which is at 1,600 feet or 1,605 feet above sea level. And that's the reason why you can see that your MSA has also been set to 2,600 feet, because it gives you at least 1,000 feet obstacle clearance above the highest obstacle, right? So 1,600 plus 1,000 feet, they've come up with 2,600 feet as the MSA, so it gives you 1,000 feet terrain separation as well. So now we have here the chart itself, the approach for the plan view. And if you look at this particular chart, it has been designed for an overhead approach. Even if, for example, the radar is not working, you do not have radar vectors, you can fly the approach procedurally, right? Which is just follow the chart and go ahead and land. So let's say ATC clears you. Let's say you're coming in from the west and ATC says, all right, you're cleared for the full overhead ILS approach. You would typically cross this VOR, and then you can see that you would maintain a course of 078. And now if you're flying an airline or aircraft, typically it would be a category C or a category D aircraft, depending on the approach speed of the aircraft. So depending on which category, you would either choose the tiny arc over here, or if you're an airliner jet with a higher approach speed, you would maintain a category C and D. And then you would fly all the way up till 12 miles DME from Bravo, 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 which is the VOR, right? So VOR information is depicted over here, VOR DME, okay, that is information depicted here. And then it tells you that you will take a right turn and then intercept the localizer for runway 27, all right? And the course is obviously 270. And you can see this tiny feather information shown up here, right? So you can see it looks like a feather here, like this. And that depicts your glide slope, right? Your final approach segment. So it's basically telling you that from this point onwards, you will capture the glide slope and you will establish yourself on the final approach segment, meaning that you will commence your descent to go ahead and land into Mumbai. Also, they tell you that please also do a DME height check at these points, just in case the glide slope is not working correctly. You at least know that you're in the correct profile and you are on the perfect path to go ahead and land. All right. Moving forward, you also have this other information regarding your obstacle. Same information, your localizer course, the frequency that you will tune in to the localizer to capture it, and of course your Morse code information is also mentioned. The dots and dashes you can see over here, that's also mentioned. Along with that, they have given you some additional information. Radar vectoring may be provided within 12 nautical miles at 2,600 feet, provided interception of localizer takes place at 10 nautical miles or more from the touchdown. An angle of interception with localizer shall be 60 degrees or less. Obviously, this changes from chart to chart. So in this particular case, for this particular airport, this is the instructions. Finally, of course, this VAP2, that is your prohibited airspace in Mumbai, South Mumbai. You have the towers of silence. That is a prohibited airspace. You cannot fly over that, and therefore they have designated it. VA being the FIR, right? So Mumbai falls under the VABF FIR, and therefore the prohibited airspace has been labeled as this is number 2, right, in that FIR, VAP2. All right, so that ends your plan information, and now we shall move on to the profile view over here. That's what we are going to cover right now. Representing this information over here, that is called your profile information. Okay, so for one, you have your altitude and height checks, right? So for example, if for some reason your glide slope is not working correctly, you can, when you're established on the localizer, you can be doing a CDFA approach. We'll talk about that later as to what that is. But let's say your glide slope is not working and you have to descend this segment manually. That is, you're not following the glide slope. You are just doing a constant 3-degree descent, right? So this is called your localizer only approach, where the localizer gives you lateral guidance, but the pilot manually is descending on a 3-degree descent angle, right? So they've given you DME height checks for typically every mile over here, so that you know you are on the correct profile. So you know, for example, at 5 miles, you need to be at 1610 feet, and if you are, then you are on the correct profile. So typically this is mainly only done for a non-precision approach, or in this case a localizer only approach. I did mention that we will fly overhead the VOR, take a U-turn, come back, and then commence the final approach segment over here, as you can see. So that's the same thing that you're going to be doing. It just shows you from a lateral point of view what you would be doing. So you will cross the VOR, plus they tell you some additional information that you have to be at least 3,800 feet, and then you maintain a course of 078 if you're doing if you have a category C or D aircraft. That depends on your approach speed, and you maintain 082 if you're flying a Cat A and B aircraft. So if you're doing a Cat C, you fly 078, right? And if you're flying a category A or B aircraft, you fly 082, right? So again, that's the information that they're trying to show you over here. So anyway, you cross the VOR at 3,800 feet, you descend all the way to 2,900 feet, and again, depending on the category of aircraft, so my aircraft typically is a category C aircraft. So at 12 miles, I do a sharp U-turn and come back and establish myself on the localizer. That's this segment here that we are talking about, right? Once I'm established on the localizer, I would now reach the final approach segment. Now, if you look over here, right over here, if you have a glide slope, typically this feather-like structure here, that depicts the point at which you would be able to capture the glide slope. All right, so that's called your final approach point, where the glide slope comes alive, and then you capture it, and then you commence your descent. However, let's say the glide slope is not working. You're doing a localizer only approach or a non-precision approach. Typically, you would come in here, and then this point over here, that's called your Maltese cross. Okay, it's called the Maltese cross. It's an identifier, or it's meant to depict the final approach fix. That is for the non-precision approach. For the precision approach, ILS, it would be a final approach point, That is the point where you capture the glide slope. If it's a non-precision approach, it's a final approach fix, where you are supposed to commence the descent manually. Okay, so FAF. And you can see the course also. That is the course that you will be established on, the localizer course 270, and then you keep descending all the way, right? Now, the last aspect of this is, to what point do we descend down to, right? So if you are doing a non-precision approach, that is a localizer only approach in this case, I would come down to this point, which is called my MDA, minimum descent altitude, right? So I've reached this point, MDA. If I see the runway, I land. If not, I go around. So this I would do in case of a CDFA approach, continuous descent, final approach. Okay, so in this case, I would come down to this point and go around. If I am doing a precision approach, that is an ILS approach, I would fly along to this point, which is called the final approach point, and then commence my descent and fly all the way to this point. Okay, so the first arrow is for the non-precision. The second arrow here in this case is for the precision approach. Because it's a precision approach, because it's an ILS approach, you're able to fly much further down to a lower decision altitude, because it brings you so close to the runway, right? So you can see that in this case it is 230 feet. I'd come to 230 feet. If I'm still not able to see the runway, I go around. Okay. However, if I'm doing a non-precision approach, localizer only approach, I fly this way. I go down all the way till this arrow, which is basically 540 feet, and then I execute the go around. Okay. The only thing I would like to add to this is, typically, because it's a CDFA approach, and I will cover this in a later video, you will add a margin of 50 feet. So in reality, it will not be 540, it will be 540 plus 50, 590 feet when you will make that decision to go around. Okay, and that's called your MDA, minimum descent altitude. Perfect. And lastly, this gray area again depicts that MDA over here. You should never descend below it if you're doing a non-precision approach. And this over here is your DME, right? 0.8 and 4 miles in this case, where you are from the runway threshold. So in this case, for example, if I have to look at my final approach fix, it is 4.1 mile. This segment is 4.1. This segment is 4 miles. And this segment is 0.8, right? This information is from runway threshold. This information is based on the localizer. Okay. Now moving forward, TCH stands for threshold crossing height. That is, if you are following the glide slope, you should ideally cross the threshold at approximately 50 feet, right? So that you don't bump into obstacles or the perimeter wall, etc. And that's called your threshold crossing height for runway. We are talking about this segment over here, and this is called your conversion tables, right? Conversion tables. Basically, if you're flying at a certain ground speed, it tells you at a 3-degree descent angle, what should your rate of descent be? So, for example, if you're doing a non-precision approach, you're flying this way, and like I said, the final approach segment would be manually flown by the pilot, right? So you would have to know what rate of descent you have to maintain. Let's say you're flying at 140 knots, and in that case, your rate of descent would be at least 743 feet per minute, provided you're flying a 3-degree descent. So that is that information that they are portraying over here. Okay, and this is called your conversion tables right over here. Going back to the profile view, I believe I did not cover this M over here. What does that mean? So this is called your MAP, which is called your missed approach point. So what that means is, let's say, for example, you're flying a non-CDFA approach, the traditional old school way of flying a non-precision approach, non-CDFA. What you would typically do is you would look at this table here, and you would say, okay, I'm flying at 140 knots of ground speed, so therefore my rate of descent should be at least 743 feet per minute. So approximately 700 feet per minute, you would commence your descent approximately with an approximate margin. You'd go all the way down to your MDA, right, which is in this case 540 feet. You would level off and you would fly you would not descend below your MDA, right? You'd fly all the way till your MAP, which is your missed approach point. Okay, and this is basically 1 mile on the localizer. You would reach your MAP if you're able to see the runway well and good. You go ahead and land. If you're not able to see the runway, you go around, right? So this is called a step down approach. So here you are leveled off over here, number one. Then you commence your descent, and over here you level off again, and then you go to your MAP. If you see the runway again, you descend again. So you can see that you are descending through multiple stages, and it's called a step down descent. So that is why the MAP is designed for. If you're doing a CDFA approach or a precision approach, you will not need the MAP. Okay, so moving forward, we have now covered this segment as well, the conversion tables. The only thing remaining is the icons, right? So that's basically, I have already told you that this is basically your the initial actions of your missed approach, so that it's very easily and pictorially depicted to you, so you can easily follow the actions. And over here, this information is the approach lights available to you. At the airport, you can see that it is a high intensity approach lighting system type 2, right? So HIALS, which means high intensity approach lighting system. And then you have the poppies, which is of course the lights which you would use to know that if you are flying on the correct descent path to land. Okay, so that information is given here, and it's called your icon information. All right, moving forward, last bit, guys. I know it's been a long explainer, but the last bit over here is called your landing minimums. It's called your landing minimums, and obviously you can see here that in this particular case, it's the standard minimums, which is set by DGCA, which is a regulator for India, and they have mentioned the type of chart, which is the ILS chart. For the ILS, the minimums, that is the latest at which you can see the runway, is 230 feet if it's the DA, decision altitude. If you want height above ground, it is 207 feet. If you're doing a non-precision approach, in this case a localizer only approach where the glide slope is not working, in that case with the CDFA approach, your minimums would be, the MDA, minimum descent altitude, would be 540 feet above sea level, or if it is height above ground, 517 feet. The last area over here is your type of approach lights available. Depending on the approach lighting system that is available to you, your visibility requirement for you to land will change. Obviously, if you have a full set of approach lights available to you, then obviously it's easier to spot the runway. Therefore, the visibility would be typically a little lower. The requirement would be a little lower, as it's easier to spot the runway. So you can see over here, this is called your full approach lighting system available. If that is the case, regardless of which category of aircraft you have, A, B, C, or D, your visibility requirement, your RVR, that is the runway visual range, the visibility that is required to see down the runway, you only need 550 meters of visibility. However, let's say for some reason some of your lights are not working, your touchdown zone lights or your centerline lights are not working, that's what they say, TDZ or CL out. In that case, you would need still only 550 meters, provided you have autopilot or flight director. So here they've given you a number one indication, and they're telling you that if you do not have an HUD, a heads-up display, or an autopilot or a flight director, in that case you will need at least 750 meters because it's difficult to spot the runway, right? And the last segment over here talks about the ALS, which is the approach lighting system. If that is not working, then you need at least an RVR of 1200 meters, because then it becomes very difficult to spot the runway. Here, right. So let's look at now if you're doing a localizer only approach, because it's a non-precision approach, they typically require a higher visibility, right? So if you have a category A or B aircraft, you would require at least 1500 meters. However, like I said, most of us, or rather if you're flying an airliner aircraft, your category C or D, In that case, you need at least 1600 meters. And if your approach lights are not working, in that case, you need at least 2400 meters, as it's tough to spot the runway. Lastly, over here, this information here is called the PANSOPS procedure for air navigation services, aircraft operations. That is the ICAO document referenced by Jeppesen to create all of this, right? So all these are standard terms. Your DA, your MSA, your TDZ, ALS, all these terms are defined by the International Civil Aviation Organization under this document called the PANSOPS. And Jeppesen is referencing this to create this approach chart, and also these approach categories A, B, C, D, and the speeds and all of that is standardized across the world. And of course, this depicts the changes which have been made compared to the last chart. What is new in this particular chart has been mentioned over here, and of course your Jeppesen information with the copyright, etc. Remember, guys, that this is a completely open source video just to interpret how to read the Jeppesen. Remember, Jeppesens are private charts, and you would need your subscription to be able to utilize these charts. All right. I hope this chart has been of some significance, or at least useful to you. In the future segments, if you do like it, please mention or ask me what you would like me to cover, and I'll do that. Be it en route charts, maybe it's taxiway charts, maybe it's a DME chart. I'll be more than happy to cover it for you. All right. So until next time, folks, see you around.